To begin on a normal day, the end of this drive would take about a half hour to 40 minutes or so. Imagine with the ceremony and the honor that it'll probably take longer than that. And we'll be watching it as it moves forward. So we can see these many officers now moving about. Diane Pathu among them, down on the ground. And Diane, I know that you've been outside the chapel since the early hours of this morning. I know we had some challenges before the funeral mass began. What are you seeing now?
So I think that you and Tanya both said this very eloquently, and that is, so everybody, as they disperse, it's just a lot of heavy hearts, right? I mean, it's just been such a tremendously emotional day this morning and now into this afternoon. And now, as everybody sort of makes their way moving forward to follow this procession, it's just been a very bittersweet day. And I say bitter in the obvious sense that it's been difficult, but sweet to see everybody come together as one for a 29-year-old officer who was on the force for 3 years. But that didn't matter. What mattered is that she was loved, she was respected, and she did so much good in the short time that she was on this earth, and that was truly felt among so many people. I mean, there have been folks here from all across the state. They have no idea who she is, no idea who her family is, but they wanted to be here to just be surrounded by so many different officers. They wanted to pay their respects, and now they're making their way to that procession. So what happens now? We're waiting for the Superintendent Brown, to walk over to the media podium here and say a few words. He's not going to take any questions, we're told, but is going to make a statement on behalf of the Chicago Police Department. So of course we will stand by for that. But really just the mood right now is just heavy, just very, very heavy hearts. They are obviously so tremendously proud of this young woman, but also just completely heartbroken over what happened to her, and watching just her family relive just her life and everything that she's done and how much she meant to them had to be difficult for so many of us. I mean, there were so many people inside the church that you saw, but there were out here watching via monitors. It was just so beautiful, such a beautiful service, and we are so honored to be a part of that. And I think that that's sort of the notion here, that all of these officers near and far that came together are just honored to have been here, been a part of something so special. And as I mentioned, the Superintendent, David Brown, expected to come to the podium very, very soon to just make a statement to the media, and then obviously they'll go on from there. So stay tuned for that. Tanya and Sherelle, I'll toss it back to you.
And Diana, I know that we'll see the Superintendent when he does speak. I want to ask you about something a little earlier on, because all of these officers are standing out there, full uniform, heavy uniforms, in the earlier heat and humidity. I hear that there were some that had to be taken to the hospital. You know any more about what happened?
5 of them, in fact, had to be transported. It was just, at the time, the real feel, we talk about real feel, what that feels like. It felt like 90 degrees, and it was extremely humid, extremely warm, and these officers were standing at attention for a very long period of time. You know, there was water being passed around, but there really isn't enough when it's just so hot and humid. And so, yes, we understand that 5 of them did faint and had to be either transported or taken care of by the paramedics who were on the scene. They did eventually bring in some cooling buses to help any of the officers, even civilians, that were here that had to be outside, that needed to just cool down. So we did see at least a couple of cooling buses that eventually arrived to take care of anybody that needed a little bit of a break.
Got it, Diane. Appreciate the update.
All of those officers attending today's service in order to pay tribute and to honor the life of Ella French. Cardinal Blaise Cupich, in his homily, saying that one of the greatest ways that we can honor that life is to learn from it. These were his words in the homily. He said, Ella took the time to know others, to connect with them on the level of our common fragile humanity, and understood that she too always had more to learn. And again, Terrell, those words that you repeated earlier, so poignant. No one should pretend to put the period at the end of a sentence or a person's life, or worse, claim they could not learn from others or change for the better. So many are changed for the better by 29-year-old Ella French.
Chuck Gowdy, watching these live pictures as we are right now. Chuck, as you watch now as we get ready for this procession, your thoughts on these pictures?
Well, Terrell, Cardinal Supich, who officiated the funeral today, did rise to the occasion in this regard when he said that we should grieve for Officer Ella French, but also for the children who have been cut down by gunfire every day. Not a point he dwelled on, but those words hung over the church and all of us who witness and in many cases report on these incidents. And the Cardinal seemed intent on leaving that thought out there, because the fact is that it was one of the reasons that Officer French was out there in that neighborhood and on the job every day, because there has been such a problem with children becoming victims of gunfire here.
Chuck, one of the things that Cardinal Supich mentioned when he was talking about the compassion and the care that Ella gave for others, and in mentioning the gun violence that plagues the community, was one instance where Ella was the officer who rushed a baby girl, a 1-month-old, to the hospital. She had been hit by a bullet in a terrible incident. That she rode with the baby's mother. The baby's mother said that Ella was consoling her the entire way, and that her great regret now was that she didn't get to properly thank her.
Well, that did come out a couple of days after her death, and was certainly one of the many poignant moments and stories that we've heard about involving this young officer.
One of the many moments where she demonstrated that empathy that we heard so much about today.
Yeah. And Chuck makes an excellent point to the Cardinal's words. He said, yes, let us grieve together for Ella, but also for all those she cared about, for the children, young and old, cut down by gunfire every day, for our youth, whose hopes for a better life are hemorrhaging as doors of opportunity open to others are slammed shut, for families afraid of becoming a victim of gun violence or a carjacking or an assault, and for Ella's fellow police officers who, like her, have given the full measure of their lives.
We learned more about Ella in these last several weeks, and certainly today, as we had the opportunity to hear firsthand from her mother, her adoptive mother, about those first days together when she met her future daughter, an 8-month-old baby, who they were connected by Catholic charities, religion clearly playing an important role in the family's life, as now, as they say goodbye, this traditional Catholic Mass honoring the life of Ella French. Elizabeth French talked about the joy that Ella carried through life, that contrary to what one might think, the beginnings were very serious. This 8-month-old who refused to smile, but not for very long. That once she did break out into a smile, that smile never left her face. And she was adopted 4 years later, and her mother expressed, not today, but earlier, a couple of weeks ago, and in the days before today, that Ella had an appreciation for her fortune.
Yeah.
That she was very lucky. And Ella's mother did indeed express today how lucky she was, saying that one of the great honors of her life was being Ella's mom.
Said that was the best thing that she had done in her life. And you mentioned that smile. She said that it lit up her face, it lit up her home, and it captured her heart. And she knew right then that Ella would be her daughter forever. Amazing, her composure. She wasn't on the program, at least the one that we saw here. but incredible words from Elizabeth French, speaking about her daughter, this amazing woman, again, that we have gotten to know since her death over the last 2 weeks. Her heart, how she developed into the woman that she became, her drive, her passion, described by her fellow officers as one of the good ones, truly dedicated, loved the community that she served and the people in it. And we saw a little bit of that yesterday with the visitation and the thousands again that showed up to the chapel to pay their respects, among them people in the community.
People in the community who had been touched by her personally, who recognized her, who knew her, who saw her contributions in the community. Ella Grace French, aptly named, as we learned from her godfather during today's service, saying that grace was a trait that she expressed in so many ways throughout her life. This spitfire of a child, as he remembered her, who had tremendous compassion and tremendous empathy for others, for people, for animals, as we learned from her partner, Joshua Bloss. He described how whenever there was a stray dog out on the road, they had to stop the car. The dog had to be brought into the car. They had to take the car to the shelter. And that one time that the dog wasn't taken to the shelter, but no, it was taken into Ella's home, Bella.
Her heart.
And into her heart, Bella, her rescue pup.
Yeah. Waiting to see now as the procession begins and what happens next. I know that we were waiting to hear from Superintendent Brown. Potentially he would share a few words, waiting to see if that happens. And in the meantime, we reflect on the beautiful life of this police officer.
Ella French, 29 years old, who attended Wentworth Military Academy and College in Missouri. She was there for 2 years. She graduated, however, from Downers Grove North in 2009. Ella's mom said she came back from military school wanting to be a police officer, and so that's exactly what she did. Before she could get there, she worked other jobs unrelated, but always with the same integrity and the same attention and the same desire to always be improving, before she finally became a Cook County Sheriff's Correctional Officer in 2017. She wasn't there very long. She made her mark, though, described by her colleagues as always having compassion for others, and that she treated people with respect. Only a little more than a year after becoming a Cook County Sheriff's Correctional Officer, she joined CPD, starting in that 10th district on the west side, before moving on to the Chicago Police Department's community safety team. And
in that 10th district, there was a tribute on Tuesday night, and everyone gathered there. They prayed together, shared in sadness together, and described Ella as an officer who was, as we've heard many times today, a beautiful person. She wanted to be there. She wanted to be there with her fellow officers day in and day out. She wanted to serve her community. She wanted to keep the community safe. Tanya, you mentioned it. It was her dream job. Not so much a job as it was a calling for her. And the commander there said it was a dream that was cut far too short. Given what we know, what we've learned about the person that Ella French was, let's talk a little bit more about those community safety teams. And Chuck Gowdy, we'll bring you in here as we hear about that empathy, that compassion, that desire to serve. We understand why Ella was especially well suited for that particular unit.
Well, it would certainly seem that that was the case, surrounded by people who came out of the academy at roughly the same time. It was a new way of doing things, however, as we reported a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago or so, that in the past, these teams that were plugged into high violence, high gun violence, high crime areas were largely comprised of veteran officers who had been on tactical teams and had the experience that the department thought was necessary to go into situations like that. The community safety team that Superintendent Brown formed was not that. It was the antithesis of that whole long-time Chicago police tradition of plugging in experienced officers. They were taking younger officers to some degree that they hoped would relate better to the community. But there was a flip side to that in the eyes of some, and that was, do you have the kind of street experience necessary to survive these moments? And so that will be one of the things that the police will look at, that Superintendent Brown, presumably, and his command staff will attempt to reevaluate here in view of what happened during that incident back on August the 7th.
Her colleagues in that unit, on that community safety team, of course, is Officer Carlos Yanez Jr. He is recovering in the hospital. He was critically wounded, but is out of the ICU at this point. He is breathing on his own. He has partial use of his left eye and his right arm. Hopefully that's just for now, and his condition will continue to improve. Let's move now to the podium, where we see Superintendent David Brown approaching along with Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
We're heartbroken. We're grief-stricken. Many officers feel alone, and yes, some have anger. But we'll continue to be courageous, brave, committed, and dedicated for Ella, to protecting the people of Chicago. I would just ask the people of Chicago to continue to pray for our healing during this time of deep, deep grief by every one of our officers. Please keep us in your prayers. And please continue to say thank you to officers for their service. Mayor?
I want to reflect on the words of the Cardinal today, who said, in essence, that through our grief, we should strive to find unity and a common sense of purpose. The grief that unites us is the same force that can bring us together as we move forward. What I think we hoped for, and I hoped for today, was a simple but beautiful expression of solidarity and support for the French family, for Ella, and I also want to remind you to keep Officer Yanez and his family in your prayers. It's a tough day for our city, and we've had a lot of tough days recently, but I feel very confident that we will move forward because we must. We must because our city is hurting, because lots of people need us. We must because it's what we know the families that are suffering want us to do. We need to stand tall and make sure that we remember all of our victims and survivors of this terrible scourge of gun violence. And I want to also lift up the comments of the superintendent. This is a time of grief and anger and frustration, but I hope that we use this as an opportunity of reflection on how we can live, each of us, a better life, from where we stand to show leadership and support for those in our city that are most vulnerable. And we need to continue to thank our brave men and women in law enforcement, our police department, fire department, the brave dispatchers and call takers at the Office of Emergency Management Communication. We need to thank them for their service. We will always owe them a debt of gratitude that we will never be able to truly repay, but we must thank them every single day for their sacrifice and for their service, because they truly live to make our lives better, to make our lives safer, and we can never forget that. We have to come together and unify around this simple message that we need each other. The pandemic certainly taught us that, and we certainly know that from, I think, the incredible grief that people have been experiencing since we learned of the death of Ella French. So thank you all. God bless us all.
We're going to jump into the procession, but the Deputy Chief Bars and the commander, both of CST, will have some comments as well.
That's Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Police Superintendent David Brown echoing the call for action that was uttered by Cardinal Blaise Cupich today, saying, quote, "We each need to do our part to help law enforcement as they work to hold people accountable for their actions and stem the flood of illegal guns. And we all have a role in untying the cords of injustice that keep many of our brothers and sisters bound in poverty and despair." Two things that Ella strove toward in her short life.
Superintendent went on to say, "I will ask the people of Chicago to continue to pray, continue to say thank you to our officers, and thank them for their service." This has been the funeral mass for Chicago police officer Ella French. Continuing coverage on our website, abc7chicago.com, on our streaming platforms, and a full wrap on the news this afternoon at 4 o'clock. For Tanya Babbage, I'm Terrell Brown. Good day to you.
A big load of laundry in the background.
Yeah.
Their e-learning.
Yeah.
Oh, all
That's
right.
so cute.